this episode of NorCal News Now, we're speaking with U.S. Congressional candidate for California District 1, Marty Walters. I'm your co-host, Mike Richman.
And I'm your co-host, Aaron Haar.
Yes, you are, Aaron. How you doing today, man?
Doing all right. I ate a lot of wood chips like a beaver. I did a lot of tree work today, and the wood chips come off the chainsaw, and they kind of go in your mouth. So I'm a little scratchy voice today.
You ate wood chips?
Well, you can keep your mouth shut, but
you can't keep your mouth
eventually you
shut,
have to
no.
be, you got to breathe and you got to talk to people down, and so.
That whole breathing thing is just so inefficient.
So I'm tired and I'm grumpy, Mike. Okay.
Gee, that's a real difference from normal when you're on the show. All right. Well, our guest on today's show is a passionate advocate for the people's voice in government. She's got an impressive business resume with experience in occupational safety, consumer risk mitigation, and banking. She's also a big supporter of the arts, specifically helping to facilitate music education for young people. And most important of all, she's a mother of 3 young adults. All these things inform her campaign to capture the Democratic nomination in the race for the U.S. Congress here in District 1. So Marty Walters, welcome to NorCal News Now.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. It was nice to drive down in a little bit of a snowstorm.
Yeah, a little bit of rain and snow today.
It was.
Well, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks.
We're really looking forward to talking to you. So what would you say has been the impetus, the motivating factor in your campaign?
Well, we've never had a candidate run for federal office from Plumas County here in District 1. And one of the big reasons I'm running is to give a voice to people like me that live up in these northern mountain counties that haven't really been getting a lot of attention from our elected officials to date. So it's partly that, and it's also partly because I really want to see more women running. And running for Congress is a great way to get attention and to focus on women in electoral politics.
And what are some of the kind of the unique aspects of that area of Plumas that make it a little different from the rest of us here in District 1?
Well, Plumas County is the Feather River watershed. And, we went through a lot of the same things that Oroville went through last year with the huge amount of water we got. We supply all the water that goes into the Oroville Reservoir. We also sometimes go through the ups and downs of drought and too much water some years. And that's been a really interesting experience for me, living in one watershed like that, where you go through these cycles of both environment, but also the cycles of the economy, as forestry has been in decline for decades now. And that's one of the other big reasons I'm running is for rural economies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to get to that because that's a really good topic. I know you're really interested in. Well, this is a unique district. I mean, District 1, you think about the size of District 1, just the square mileage of the district, and you think about the component of the constituents here in District 1. So, as a Democrat, certainly there's several things, and I think that we talked about that we know that you need to win as a Democrat here in District 1. Certainly we need to blow out our turnout of the progressives here in the district. We need to a certain point maybe hold down a little bit of the turnout on the conservative side, but also, I mean, there's a lot of moderates, independents, and even some moderate Republicans that would, maybe given the right opportunity, maybe vote for a Democrat. So what do you say to those people, those voters, to maybe try to bring them over to your side of the equation a little bit?
Yeah, it's definitely a big challenge here. Doug LaMalfa won by over 10 points. So that's a big hurdle for us to get over. I think that for us to really do well, there are 3 basic things we have to be doing. We have to get our Democrats to turn out. We don't have really great turnout in our more urban areas of District 1. And so that's, downtown Reading, downtown Chico. We can improve a lot on our turnout in those areas. The second thing is we've got to get Democrats to really vote Democratic. We have a fair number of Democrats that don't vote Democrat. They vote Republican in this district. And that's the nature of us being a little bit of a Rust Belt area. We used to be highly supportive of labor. We had a lot of union labor jobs in this region, and we haven't seen that as much recently. So people have sort of, evolved and moved over to the Republican Party, even when they've kept their Democratic registration. I'll tell you, my dad is one of those guys. And then third, women are the biggest challenge for me going into this. I'm really strong about women running and getting involved in electoral politics, but I'm also really strong on getting women to think about voting for women. And we have a little bit of an older population in our district. We have a lot of women that vote, year in and year out, but have never had a chance to vote for a woman. And so that's something we need to really appeal to and get our women's clubs and all of our volunteers and our grandmothers all out and thinking about voting for a woman for Congress. It's going to be exciting.
Absolutely, no doubt.
Let's go back to the rural economy. President Trump put out this new budget. He's cutting several programs, 22 programs, I think. And one of them is the Rural Business Cooperative Service, which provides loans, grants, payments intended to increase opportunities in rural communities. You've been on this great tour on 299 on the highway, going to towns and talking with people. What are you telling them as far as the economy? And do they feel like they've been, kind of had in the politics of LaMalfa and Trump?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Agriculture Department as a whole supports this enormous and broad stretch of economic activity in this area. And they've moved in to do a lot of things that forestry and ranching used to do more of. So there's become more of a government program or reliance on those programs. And Trump is proposing to cut the Department of Agriculture by more than 20%. I think it's like 22% in their budget. That's going to have an enormous impact on a whole range of things up here. And it's going to mean things like not being able to get loans for purchasing properties, not being able to get loans and support grants for new business startups. We're going to see a lot of our government agencies actually shutting down and not being able to keep offices open across our region. It's going to have a big, big impact on us. But I think that thing that we have to always be coming back to, though, is it going to move the needle for us to be doing more of these kinds of things? And we need to think about a rural economy from the standpoint of getting back into this very large scale kind of sustainable forestry. It's not the old forestry. It's not the 70s, it's not the 60s and 70s, but we've got to get into a large scale version of forestry for a modern age. And that's forestry that protects our water and supports watersheds. And it's forestry that deals with the fuel and the fire risks that we have. And it's forestry that produces products that are going to be really replacing a lot of some of the things that we rely on now, like a lot of engineered products or a lot of the plastics that we use in our society today. And that's going to make a huge impact on climate change here. And that kind of large scale change is going to require a huge movement of the needle. It's going to require a lot of resource and coordination. That's what the federal government is positioned to do. It's why we have a federal government, and it's all on, a lot of this is on federal land. And it's one of the big reasons I want to run for Congress, is to have an impact in that area. Right now, I'm serving on Governor Brown's working group for removing barriers to forestry products in industry. So we're working at it from the state level, and I'm leading up a finance group there that's working to look at, what kind of financing do people need to do things like build and put together biomass energy projects. But we need to have the federal government in the picture because, these are national forests for the most part, and it's big scale. And that's where the federal government comes in.
It's hard not to be cynical. I mean, when I look at some of the tactics of the Republican Party, and I think I have to lump Donald Trump and our Congressman Doug LaMalfa in here. The cynicism of pushing through a tax cut, which was, it's been said many times, but it has to be said again and again and again, because it's true that it benefited really the top 1% of the 1%. And when you are looking at cutting things like these rural initiatives that are so clearly valuable, cutting some of the business initiatives in the industry that I work in, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program is one that has been proposed to be cut, which directly helps small business. Now, again, we should make everyone know for sure that President Trump and his administration don't make the budget, the Congress does, but these just kind of set the direction for what the president is thinking and people that support the president are thinking. So the question is it not cynical? Don't you think that it's short-sighted and cynical to be looking at a tax cut that even if you buy into the trickle-down theory a little bit and say, well, yeah, that will benefit somebody somewhere, if you have to cut everything else to make that work, isn't that silly. Isn't that foolish?
Of course it's cynical. It's extremely cynical. And it just goes to show, who they are answering to. They're answering to money, and money wants money. They want to go that direction. We think about, the big industries in this area. Agriculture is a really important industry in this area, but it doesn't employ a lot of people. Forestry is important, and as a resource, it's a very important area to be in. But again, it doesn't employ a lot of people. We really need to be thinking about how do we balance, things like small business. Small business employs people. Hospitals employ people. The government employs people to do services like working in the parks and having recreational facilities. Those are areas that we have to work on. We have to throw out that cynicism and actually get back to the basics of how do you develop an economy that's balanced and has resource management as its kind of fundamental base, but also really pushes towards service areas that are going to keep people working and being able to raise families in a way that that is sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Do you, from a high level perspective, do you think of yourself more as a kind of a deal maker, conciliator, or as a fighter? I mean, that's a question I like to ask people because I personally am a centrist. I think of myself as a centrist, and I like people that can make deals, that can get into Congress and can begin to get people in a room and hash out a deal, because that's how government to me works. But there are those who say, well, no, we have to stand up and not give an inch and stand on our principles and never bend on those. So I like to hear people who are running and what they feel about that question.
Well, the question I have back to you is, why is it an either or question?
Okay.
I really feel like we often set up these false dichotomies that we have to go one direction or the other direction, when in fact, I think we have to really be working on everything all at once. And then you have to be able to step back and say, this is a line we're not going to cross. This is a fundamental value that we're going to stand strong behind. And then everything else that is going above that, we're going to be willing to talk about and come to some kind of common ground. The great example of that is when you think about health and safety kinds of issues, like whether it's, how we're going to manage gun control going forward, how are we going to deal with basic health and safety, like with forest fire risks. We have to have a line, a fundamental value that we all get behind, and that we're going to protect and maintain over the long term. And then how we get there, we need to negotiate on. So I think that we have to both stand strong and we have to negotiate all at the same time.
Good answer. I like that.
Well, that's a great way to segue into the gun debate. And I mean, and what a tough issue and tough to talk about, but we're going to talk about it. That's what we do. So even the protesters down in Florida, the passionate people that want to change the gun laws, that's even spread out here for some young folks locally going to the school board here in Chico and going in front of the Butte County School Board, asking them to look at some ways to make students safer. How do you feel right now about things, and do you feel like this is a time that's going to start moving the needle?
And I will tell you, just before I get to that, is on the front page of my local paper up in Quincy, gun safety and school safety was on the front page. And just yesterday, a group of students from our high school marched through town. They left class and marched through town with signs saying that, they want to push for gun control. That's a really interesting story coming out of these small mountain towns that are tend to be very pro-gun, or at least that's the concept that we have. So you do have students that are willing to stand up and willing to march through town with signs, waving to drivers and saying, hey, we want you to pay attention to us and to our safety. And we've got front page news coverage on that in our local papers. And that's happening across our region in all of our small towns. Those discussions are now starting. And that's where I get to the idea of, these kids in Florida have done something to push a conversation into the mainstream in such a way that we have a chance to get over a tipping point where talking about guns and dealing with this issue is something that is going to be expected and not a lefty fantasy. It's going to be become part of our regular conversation, and that we have to actually really work toward a solution together. And I think it's going to mean, a whole bunch of different things. We sometimes get into this idea of, single action bias, that one action is going to solve all the problems. Now, we know that semi-automatic weapons are a big part of the problem here, and that we have to really tackle the semi-automatic weapon availability and the fact that we've got all of these semi-automatics out there in the world that don't serve a purpose in terms of protection or in terms of sport or in terms of hunting. And so that's something that we need to put on the table and work on. But we do also have to work on a lot of the other systems that need to support sensible management of guns and just our world of living in a place where the Second Amendment exists. And that means we have to really do a lot more to support the background check system. So that's another thing that Trump is cutting the budget on. You always say, turn off the volume on what he's saying and turn up the volume on what he's actually doing to really understand what's going on. That system desperately needs resources to work better because it relies on this web of all the states and all of these different federal agencies putting in data and getting data back out of that system. It's complicated, and it needs to work so much better if we want to have any faith in it whatsoever.
I think people are pretty upset. They're pretty fed up. And your opponent, Doug LaMalfa, has done a pretty bad, he's favored the NRA. He's gotten money from the NRA, and a lot of bills that he has either co-sponsored. He co-sponsored the bill to have people with mental health issues to go ahead and get guns. He's behind silencer bills and different things that, some people on one side will say that is making us less safe, and it's sort of ridiculous. Put some earplugs in, but I guess what I have to say is, where do you think that party is going to go now? It looks like they're starting to move towards arming teachers, as I don't know how law enforcement's going to feel about that.
Well, and arming teachers would immediately put you in a situation where you've got more guns in the hands of teachers, far, far above any number of police officers we have in this country. And we already have trouble with managing the risks with police officers in shootings, right? Add that in many times more, that number of people in schools with guns and trying to maintain some sort of control. It's a terrible, terrible idea. But really, I think the first thing that we have to do, especially with the GOP, having control currently of both houses in Congress, is we have to really put pressure on getting that money out of the politics. Yeah. And that's one of the fundamental things. It comes through in a lot of these things when it comes to balancing people against power. Money is the thing, right? If we can get money out of the equation, then we have a chance to actually find common ground and do something good with that. Yeah. And so that's going to mean, quite frankly, that we have to allow voters to put people in office who really strongly believe in that mission of getting money out of politics. And it's one of the things I've done is, I've put my money where my mouth is, which is that, I've been raising money mainly from within our district. I think the last time I looked, we were somewhere less than 5% of the money comes from outside of our district. So the people who support me are coming from within our region. And the thing that we're doing is we're running a low budget campaign that's very focused on working together to get somebody new elected to Congress, and not about outsourcing that worry or outsourcing that anxiety to somebody else to just run their campaign and make it happen. I really hate it when people tell me, what are you going to deliver to me? Are you going to deliver the millennial vote? Are you going to deliver the mountain vote? It's not about delivering the vote to somebody as a candidate. It's about how we're going to elect a new person to Congress that represents our district. And it's one of the big themes of my campaign is about getting represented. And it's about really getting represented from the people side and not from the power side.
Yeah. I like what you said about guns. These kids are smart. They know that $55 million got donated or contributed in the 2016 election by the NRA, and they know it's all about profits. They know all these bills that get signed are all ultimately leading to profits for the gun manufacturers. Absolutely.
And my youngest is 19, and right in that age range, just graduated from high school recently. And, these kids really are smart. They are knowledgeable, they're hooked in. And I think the thing that I really admire so much is the degree to which they are self-aware and sort of plugged into their own, where they're coming from themselves. I think that's the great hope we have. I am so excited about running in a way because I'm working with a lot of younger people to make that happen. And my son is also my campaign manager. So people are often saying, how can you possibly run a campaign with a 19-year-old campaign manager? Can you possibly be doing it right? And, the thing I come back to that is actually that my 19-year-old campaign manager is one of the most, energetic, knowledgeable, and ethical people that I've ever worked with. Me coming from this very compliance heavy, very concerned about making sure things are done right and done safely. And him coming from this perspective of government and really understanding how to work electoral politics, we're a great combination, and we are really focused on making sure that our campaign is totally compliant with all of these election campaign finance laws, that we are doing everything proper, and that we're doing it in a smart way that's strategic for the region.
Yeah, a few weeks back, there was some discussion. There was a conversation on sent kind of privately through email, and it turned into a social media discussion. Just kind of let's go back and kind of talk about, share with the different ideas that some people had about that, and let's try to kind of finish what happened here. Sure.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. And it also gave me just this whole different perspective on how things can sometimes boil up on social media and be sort of difficult to grab the tail of that dragon in a way. But this was a case where there had been for weeks discussion about trying to winnow down the pool of candidates in the primary. We have an open primary, so everybody runs together in the same primary. And at the time we had 4 candidates that were Democrats. 3 of them were women, and there was also a man running. And I was hearing a lot, both directly and on the phone, and sort of across private messages. And I even got invited to a drink to talk about how to get the candidates out of the race. And then somebody sent me an email, and I posted that email with a kind of a public response because I felt so strongly that we need to have these conversations in public. The Democratic Party has taken a big hit on its reputation in recent years because of this kind of backroom negotiations that tend to go on. And I feel so strongly that as the party of the people and the big tent party and the party that wants to represent a lot of different kinds of people, that we have to always stay open to ideas, new ways to think, new people coming in and representing the party. That's who we are. And to prematurely say, hey, we want to cut this all back down and only have one Democrat run in the primary cuts out that whole opportunity for other people to be able to say, I want to come in and see if I'm actually representing the people of this district. Does it work? Does it not work? And that's my approach generally to running here is I don't know if I'm the best candidate, but I'm giving it a try, and I'm trying to see if that's a good match for this district. And that's what I think is the best thing, is if we can find a great match for our district, then all of the other things will fall into line. And the way we do that is through the primary. And I support very strongly that primary.
Political parties are an interesting part of the American political sphere because, you look at the Constitution, there's no mention of political parties. It's not enshrined in any way legalistically.
Right. Even the primary is not.
Even the primary is really, and it's kind of a quasi, I don't want to say illegal, but it's there's really not an established role. There never was an established role that kind of evolved with time. So we're in a place now where, and if you look in the 2016 election, where the way the Republicans handled their business in the presidential and the way that the Democrats did.
Wow, yeah.
No one in the Republican hierarchy wanted Donald Trump to be. He wasn't even in the top 10 probably for what anybody wanted, yet they didn't put any fingers on any scales, very little. And
they didn't even play by the rules.
Well, but what I'm saying is Trump, if you look at the will of the voters, he won the nomination. And there certainly is a lot of conversation you alluded to over whether or not the Democrats did the same thing with regard to Bernie Sanders, and it's still maybe an open question as to whether or not Bernie really got a fair shake in the primary.
Yeah,
so
they didn't play by the rules either.
Yeah. So, the idea is what you're getting at here is, what is the right discussion to have?
Right.
What is the proper role for a candidate to have in having a discourse with each other candidates, as well as with the people that elect you?
Right. And what I wrote on the social media post is we have to expect more. Yeah. We have to expect more of ourselves as a party, as Democrats. And we also have to really expect more of our candidates. We have to hold our candidates to a high standard and be standard bearers for what is ethical campaigning, what is important to us as a party, and what it means to be able to represent people in a collective way, so that you're really harnessing collective power and not authoritative power. And I'm such a believer in collective power. I think that's the ultimate solution for us. And that's why we need to elect somebody from this district who actually represents the district, and not try to shoehorn in our idea of what is the perfect candidate, because the perfect candidate, to somebody in Chico is not necessarily the perfect candidate to somebody up in Alturas. And so we need to be thinking about, how does that work collectively, and how do we represent ourselves collectively?
Mm-hmm. Good point. Well, there's a lot of pressing issues, and we're kind of getting to the end of our segment, so we're going to wrap this up fairly quickly. But I want to let you kind of get this oar in the water a bit, because there's a lot of issues that, and some we talked about, that are important to the district and into the country. Gun control is a big one we mentioned. The broader economy, immigration reform is a big one, healthcare. So of those things, or maybe of other issues I haven't talked about, what are the things that, or the one or two things that you think are really the most pressing and important that when you get to Washington, you want to jump on right away?
Well, I'll tell you, number one thing to do in Washington is to actually do the job. Because I think right now we have somebody in Washington who's really happy to kind of let government wither on the vine, not do the job. And so number one is do the job, represent the people. That's number one. And I think after that, there are a lot of things, and we should be working on a whole bunch of things all at once. We should go there and work really hard and push these big social initiatives. And I think healthcare, gun control is a huge issue right now. Education's also a big thing. And then, my particular talent, and I think my particular passion is about the economy, and really doing something to get the economy out of this decades-long stagnation that we've had. And it's not going to be one person. It's not me just doing that. It's going to be a collective effort. And it's going to take all of us doing that, at the county levels, at the state levels, at the federal levels, getting our business people back online, and really getting that working collectively together.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be hitting the road this weekend, huh?
I am. So, instead of going to the Democratic convention, I decided to skip that and really focus on, the grassroots, which is starting in Reading, taking Route 299 all the way over to the Nevada border. And we're stopping to do meetings. We're going to do a meeting in Round Mountain on Friday at 11. We're going to do a meeting in Bernie Friday at 4:30. Is it 4:30? Mm-hmm. And then on Saturday morning, I'll be in Cedarville at 8:00 at the bakery and Hearth restaurant there. And Saturday afternoon at 2, meet and greet at the Veterans Hall in Alturas. And then Sunday, I'm playing violin in church in Fall River Mills.
Fall River Mills, beautiful.
Cool.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it, and having a chance to meet up with a lot of the people I've met on the phone and through social media, and re-meeting, people I've had a chance to meet at various events around the district. So it's going to be fun.
Speaking of that, where can people go to check out your campaign information?
Well, MartyWalters.com is the easiest place to start. And I also am on Facebook at Marty Walters for Congress, I think is the name of the page. And I'm on Twitter sort of erratically, but Twitter is kind of where some of the conversation happens. And those are probably the three best places. But, I love seeing people in person. So I'm always open to being invited to events, or, whether it's your book club or your 4-H club or anything else. I'd love to come out and see people in person.
Well, you may be on Twitter erratically, but nobody could be on Twitter more erratically than Donald John Trump.
I heard Twitter's ruined because of Donald Trump.
Well, I think Donald Trump's ruined a few things, but Twitter may be one of the least important things he's ruined. But in any event, well, Marty Walters, it's really been a pleasure getting to meet you, and thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, Marty, thank you. Incredible admiration for anybody that runs for office, and especially in this district. What incredible.
Thank you so
incredible
much.
experience for you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we have some a good amount of time yet in this primary, so we'll have you back on the show again, and we'll talk some more.
That would be a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks once again, of course, to Marty Walters for joining us on the show. And don't forget, NorCal News Now is available wherever you download your podcasts. So check us out and subscribe. We can also be found on Facebook ourselves at NorCal News Now, where you can post your comments and your suggestions. We always like to hear suggestions from our listeners for upcoming podcast topics and guests. So thank you all for listening in. We'll be back at you soon with another episode of NorCal News Now. So long.
I know.